Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. I want to welcome to the show Matthew Weiss, who is a film editor. Some of his credits include the feature films Black Bear and Abandoned. He also regularly appears as the film guy on the political talk show The Majority Report, which I love. Matthew, the film guy, welcome.
Thank you,
so much
Robert.
for doing this.
Oh, really? My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is a big topic and one that I wrestle with a lot, which we're discussing today is what is art in film? How do you separate art from a good movie to a bad movie? Is that necessarily subjective? It's a challenging topic in a way, but we're going to do our best to dive in as we do online. Matthew and I on a film group that we talk often in and comment and share opinions and argue and fight.
Do the big work
and all the rest of it. So before we get into that, I just wanted to get to know a little bit about your background, Matthew. So when did your interest in film begin? Like when did you seriously get interested in movies?
Oh, wow. Seriously? I mean, my father, my grandfather, my grandmother, they all had Super 8 cameras and they were all like hobbyists. So I kind of grew up around people who just liked image taking. And at a certain point, I got old enough to be able to use my dad's first home video camera, which was actually just like a glorified security camera that you'd plug into a massive VHS deck. And I don't know, I was like 11 or 12 at that point. And just started doing like little skits and things with my friends in the basement, because again, the camera couldn't go any further than the VCR. And then eventually I graduated to getting like a camcorder, Goldberg style. And
nice.
So I'd say right around then. And really when I turned about 13 or 14, my uncle, who's my dad's older brother, who was like not a filmmaker, but he had written some scripts and he had he sold a pilot, not a pilot, but he sold a spec script to Welcome Back, Kotter. So he gave some of his stuff, some of his, and so I saw what a screenplay was. And he started feeding me well, if you're serious about being like a film director, go see. And then he gave me a list of movies that have become some of my favorites. I think the first one he told me to go see was Harold and Maude, because I had been making movies where we cut our hands off in blood and all this funny stuff. Also, Monty Python was a big influence. But from there, he said, then go see Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, Kubrick, Spielberg, all of these movies I started to see. So I'd say it all started around then.
And so how long have you been in editor? What was that did you just dive right into wanting to become a film editor, or did you work in other capacities in film and television?
I was writing screenplays and making my own movies and stuff all through high school, and then into college. I went to film school at Florida State University, and I learned the Avid there. And I had always loved editing the stuff that I made, and I never had someone else edit it. But I don't think anybody goes into film school going I'm going to be an editor.
Right.
They usually are I'm going to be a writer director. And then it just through working after film school, I started getting jobs as an editor, just knowing Avid and Final Cut Pro eventually, and then Adobe. So it wound up becoming a vocation. And I wound up actually realizing I love editing. It's sort of like the real filmmaking, if you will, as much as I enjoyed working with actors. And I went through a whole process of trying to get better working with actors and stuff. I just I wouldn't say I fell into it, but it sort of emerged as the part that was the most fun for me. And, long story short, it's how I make my living now. So I often say that an editor has on the sort of scale of between stress and creativity, they're right at the middle point. They're at the best balance. Right. The director has way more stress, and maybe more creativity in some parts, but especially when I work with, directors who share a vision and really are open to exploring the possibilities of their footage. It's just the best of all worlds.
And now you, well, not now, but recently in the last few years, you edited a couple of feature films, Black Bear and Abandoned. Now, so these were your first features, how did you, or I mean, at least on IMDb.
Actually, I
Or-
think IMDb has Detonator on there as my first feature.
Oh,
That-
okay.
by directed by good friend Damon Malucci. That was, I don't know, 2011 or so. You know, I had started working doing, you know, any kind of editing between, you know, what does an editor do? Corporate videos, commercials,
Right, right.
TV. I did, you know, even some weddings, things like that. But all the while doing my own kind of projects and projects with friends. But Detonator was actually the first feature film I did starring Lawrence Levine. He was an actor, and I actually met Lawrence, and he went on to write and direct Black Bear.
Right.
So that sort of was that sort of path I took. But the real story of the origin story of all of this, working with Larry, is that when I came to New York out of film school, I had to do an internship for the last semester of Florida State. And I went to Good Machine, which was an indie film company. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they did.
I'm not.
It was the movie Safe. I looked at who made Safe. I want to go figure out who made Safe. And Ted Hope's name was on there, and I applied there. And they also did, like, at the time I was there, they did Happiness, the Todd Solondz movie.
Oh yeah.
Michel Gondry's first few movies. They did Ang Lee's movies. He was like their big guy. They won an Oscar and stuff with him. Anyway, for doing that internship, I got to go to a bunch of like film events in New York. And one of them was speaking on a panel was Tom Noonan. And Tom Noonan, the writer, director of What Happened Was and The Wife and so on, you know,
Good.
RoboCop and Last Action Hero as an actor,
Yeah.
Manhunter. You know, our your friend and mine, Ray Carney, had said, you know, Tom Noonan is the guy to see if you want to like learn, you know, acting and working with human beings. And I had come out of film school where you learned all the gadgets and the technique and all the equipment and all this, the business, but they didn't really boost the signal of working with actors. And some of my favorite movies, even at that time, were actor based.
Right.
So I sought him out, wound up sort of being his intern for a while, which sort of then led to me working on his next film, which was called Wang Dang. And that he did that as a play 3 times. And I was sort of started as like just like the script guy. Then I became sort of like the dramaturg, and eventually the sort of associate producer on the film. And then he started doing these workshops while his kids were growing up. He didn't like travel a lot to do a lot of movies, so we started teaching at his theater. He had this theater on East 4th Street, the Paradise Theater, which is right next to, I don't know if you know La Mama or the New York Theater Workshop. It's like indie theater row basically. And so I got heavily immersed in doing his writing. He would do these workshops where you would write a scene and actors would come in and perform it, and you'd see if it sort of worked to serve actors. His whole thing is writing and directing, and the camera and everything serves the actor being present. And he would do these various workshops. In one of these workshops, I met Larry, Lawrence Levine, and we hit it off and became friends. I shot and edited his first film, short film, and we just stayed friends over the years. I was actually in as a small part in one of his early features, Gabby on the Roof in July, which he developed sort of Mike Lee style improv with actors. And yeah, and so from there, it just sort of, you know, all the connections I made through that workshop really have served me over these past almost 20 something years now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just watched Black Bear yesterday because I hadn't heard of it, and I was really curious about it, and I really liked it. It's really interesting, and just everything about, I mean, in a way, because it starts with the Audrey Plaza, Sarah Godin, and I forget the actor's name.
Chris Abbott.
Chris Abbott.
Yeah, no, he's amazing.
Yeah, he was really good, and because I like these 2 different stories, and without giving too much away, when they're at a certain point, for those of you who haven't seen it, they have to rush someone to a hospital. And then when that basically that story ended, I was kind of like disappointed, because I was like, well, what's gonna happen? You know, I was like sort of so invested in that. But I sort of, I don't, you know, again, I would say, you know, coming from this conversation we're having today about art, whether what makes art or not. It certainly is a demanding film in the sense that it doesn't give you all the answers. You have to really go to it and really make your own sort of just observations and discoveries. And I don't I'm not sure if this was what the director had in mind, but I took it as really this exploration of filmmaking and art and creativity and how we take things from life to explore stories, but then that is not always necessarily creative. In this case, what we see in the second part of the film, how there was it destroyed this marriage in a sense. And so it was interesting because I'm still grappling with what it was all about. But I guess that is also leading to what we're talking about today. It's like, here's a film, Black Bear, that doesn't give you all the answers, that has these two separate stories, sort of like surrealistic in a sense, or impressionistic. I took it more as using sort of impressionism in the sense that, okay, it doesn't make sense that the second part now they're even this doesn't make sense what I'm saying.
No, Robert, it's a very perceptive take you have on the film. So I think to the extent that there is it to get, I think you got
it. Yeah, exactly. Not to say boom, it's a static meaning and you either got it wrong or you got it right. I'm sure I'd see it again and see something similar or different, or maybe I'm way off. Maybe you saw something different, or the director saw something different. But with that being said, it was really powerful. I mean, Aubrey Plaza she's something else. I have to see more of her performances. I haven't seen too much of her work, but she just has this edge about her, and she's got this dry wit, but also can be really intense and dramatic. And she's got that deadpan at the same time. She's so mysterious. You never quite know what she's thinking or what she's feeling. She's a really interesting actor.
Well, her background is in improv comedy. She got her start at like UCB, and I actually took an improv class with her once when she was very young, and I don't know, I'm maybe 10 years older than her, and she was incredible even as a 20-year-old, 19, whatever. So that was her wheelhouse, and she gets all the credit in the world for stretching and wanting to work with directors like Larry. She's also worked with Joe Swanberg. Now she's in this new movie called Emily the Criminal. So she's
I heard about it.
Her weight around riskier indie films. And has wanted to stretch herself as an actress and prove that she can, which is evident from Black Bear alone. Do things on just the sort of the deadpan comedy. Parks and Rec was the big TV show that she sort of broke out on. But she's awesome. She is really amazing.
I'm still one thing that you and I, we touched on what we were going to discuss today. This is maybe a good example of the use of metaphors or motifs in movies. I really go back to literature. Now, people say that it layers the visuals of the film, gives it more visual expression, let's say, or it sums up something that is complicated, making it easier for the audience to understand something complicated. So in the case of the Black Bear, now there is a bear. Now here's an example though of a metaphor that I didn't feel was a shortcut though.
Because what is it telling you? Like I've had a lot of fun reading the Letterboxd reviews and various theories, and people are very engaged. People have illuminated things that I didn't know, and I had watched the footage a million trillion times. Just interesting things to contemplate. I think I kind of know what Larry was going for in his overall sort of process. And he, this is not his first film. He's made other films that were some were sort of, you know, classic mumblecore kind of dramas, you know, comedies. He did like his version of like a screwball kind of detective story, Wild Canaries. You know, he and his
He's an
wife.
interesting filmmaker. Yeah, I saw his other one, which was also similar with the two actors, and they're also in a remote. They're
Yeah,
best
that
friends.
that one he wrote, but his wife directed. They kind of have this back and forth thing.
Oh, okay, I forget what it was called. Loving Couples.
No, it was Always Shine.
Always Shine. Again, a film I hadn't heard of, was on the Criterion Channel. Thought it looked interesting, but it has similar themes as Black Bear.
Yes. You know, Always Shine was a little more heavy on the Bergman persona kind of reference.
That's true.
But so all of that to say that I know Larry went into Black Bear thinking like, I'm gonna write this in a different way. I'm not going to be as sort of left brain about plot and character and structure, and I'm gonna sort of be a little bit more, not automatic writing, but a little bit more like direct translation of thoughts and feelings and even dreams that he's had. So this one was going in there deliberately to be like, I'm not even sure myself what exactly this is, but I know it is affecting to me. I know it's an issue or an area or a kind of dynamic that I want to explore. Like, he was being very explicit about that, which I was like, I mean, first of all, when Larry asked me to edit his movie, and I'd almost edited some of his other work, but it didn't always work out, and it was like back and forth. I did trailers for his other movies, so I was ready to just do it, whatever. But then I read the script and I was like, oh fuck yeah, this is great. You know,
Yeah.
I was so impressed by the whole 2-act structure. So, you know, he went into it not like being very dedicated to not even saying like, here's exactly what this is.
Right.
You know, stick to the truth of the feelings and not worry necessarily about X plus Y equals Z in terms of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But I can see, because even, you know, myself, and I know, you know, you and I both like Ray Carney. You people either love him or hate him, right? But
turn it off right now. Turn it off right now. If you
yeah,
hate
yeah, or take a drink if you love him. You know,
yeah, load your gun.
Yeah, one or the other. But you know, he talks a lot, writes a lot about art and art in cinema, and what he feels isn't art, and what isn't. And this topic of metaphors come up because it's true in a sense. When you see something, that you can't quite figure out what it's about, your mind then will be like, well, what does this mean? What is it? You know, and thinking that, and that's more of an intellectual exercise, and we see that all throughout, you know, literature and film. I mean, for example, American Beauty has the rose petals, for example.
and it's paper bag.
Yeah, and so the rose petals have different representations for Kevin Spacey's wife and abetting, and then the woman that he's attracted to, who's his daughter's friend. So we see that. So again, that's, you're not now. Would you say that is a shortcut to the emotion in a film, or do you think that maybe just makes it more visually interesting? Or, I know that's a hard question to answer, but
well, you know, you gave me a little bit of, you know, insight into what you wanted to talk about, and it's not too different than, like you say, what we go back and forth with other people and each other online. But you know, the way I kind of look at it, this question is like a movie like American Beauty. It's certainly not the most mindless garbage a movie can be. You know, it's clearly thought out, it's intelligent, it's speaking to, like you say, themes and feelings that are like street level, right? They're not like these like highfalutin kind of, you can't identify or so and it's also, you know, like, I agree with its sort of worldview, but it's also so, like, I kind of took that movie as being a little bit sort of phony in a way. Like, I don't know necessarily how to articulate this. It's not just the sort of heavily reliant on metaphors thing, which is like, I teach this online film appreciation class, and whenever we come across something like that, I like to go ding, 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 because it's like the filmmakers ringing a bell saying, here it is.
Look at this.
Yeah, pay attention. When you hear this ding, you know what you. So it kind of is. It's like a little spoon feeding.
Right.
It's not asking. It's in a way, it's like disrespecting the intelligence in some way. But yet it's like that's the method. What it's saying, and the sort of suburban ennui, and the sort of capitalism sort of leaving you high and dry, and all these things that American Beauty, as we're talking about, for instance, gives you, I agree with. Like it's a movie that I enjoyed at the time, but it's to me it's a little lightweight because it's like more of a fairy tale. It's like a children's bedtime story about something that I agree with and think is worthwhile pursuing, but the craft, if you want to call it that, is so heavy-handed that that to me is a and I don't even, this is your wider question, I don't even consider it not art per se. I mean, I know there's this thing that like it comes from Adorno, and KANE talks about it like art versus kitsch. I think kitsch is a kind of art. It's just after different things and interested in, to me, anything that's a creative product of any kind of medium is art. It's just bad art or, low end art.
Right.
If we want to qualify it or quantify it that way, which I'm not that interested in, like, definitive terms, but to get the meaning of what that suggests is that, art, the best art, at least to me, are the ones that have messed with my mind so much that like I had to readjust. I had to understand. I had to, yes, it resonated with something, I felt feelings and emotions in a way that was very effective, but that's not the only thing. It's one of my favorite things from KANE is, like he said, if you want to hear emotions or feel emotions, just go to the emergency room on a Saturday night. You'll be like, oh my God, so like there's something to be said. And again, I respect any person who makes a film. I know it's hard to make any kind of film, even an effective entertainment film, it's super fucking hard. So this isn't a question of like talent or effort or anything like that for me, but there is an artist's insight into the world that, allows them to present the way they see the world in a very unique way that doesn't necessarily rely on, what do you call it, hackery, things that are just like, oh, this will work, this, this does this, and and make this work. And you work on enough films and it's like you're scrambling for anything to make the scene work. Sometimes you rely on these shortcuts and things that just be like, okay, that makes sense, move on. It takes a lot of guts to make a movie that isn't easily understood or clear or pushing the right buttons in that way. So to me, these movies are one sort of level, I guess you could say. And and I'm not even saying Black Bear is this high-end masterpiece of all time. It gets, I think, weirder and deeper than that even, but it was such a rare treat to be able to work on this movie, and then to actually have it play at a major film festival, which they're getting more and more interested in celebrity and genre and things like that. So that was just like, it was like lightning striking as far as I'm concerned. And I, that's sort of how I look at it. And I enjoy all the different kinds of films, but there's something when you're seeing something like that extra little higher frequency vibration. Is that clear at all? I mean,
for sure. I mean, it's so difficult to talk about this, and I think KANE's books and writings really got me to start looking at movies this way. And when is it easy, when it exactly. And it's not to say that I agree with everything he says, or but I think
you don't. I'm hanging up. No,
yeah, well, that's it. We're done, folks.
You're out of the cult, Robert.
Yeah, that's it. If you disagree with KANE, you're done.
No, not at all.
But it really gives you a lot to think about. And so it's interesting because when you say kitsch, like American Beauty, like what do you mean by that exactly? Like that's
look, I'm not a scholar either. I'm just an interested film guy, editor, and autodictat, if you will. So my read on it is, kitsch is the kind of thing that feeds you back comfortable, familiar emotions. It's like a kind of an artistic baby blanket. And believe me, most of what I watch, I would consider kitsch. It's
Right.
and that can fail on those terms too. So it's not just like bad art is just immediately kitsch. It's kitsch is after something of a certain kind. It's after, entertaining you, evoking emotions, giving you, but not challenging you, not testing you, and that can be content or form. That's why even somebody like Mike Leigh, another guy that KANE writes about, his films on the surface don't look that arty. You know what I mean? He's
Right.
not doing crazy camera work and weird dreams and dislocated editing or anything, right? They just seem kind of normal, but
Right.
the insight into human behavior, I mean, obviously it comes from his improv sort of methods and the ways he's able to write his screenplays with the contributions of actors who are bringing things that you couldn't just intellectually bring. It's like truth is stranger than fiction kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he has this secret sauce that makes his films, to me, as deep as any that, I don't know, Tarkovsky or Bresson, these ones that are like much more obviously wow, have, because of that. And he's not going for just like, oh, let's just have it be, a funny comedy or a crazy, indie film that's going to be provocative. Or so it's not, you can't reduce it to like a formula necessarily, but to me, it's kitsch in the way that I think it's classically used, is just that kind of art that is meant to be popular. It's trying to do something that you're going to say, oh, thank you, give me more of that. And art, the best art, is going to challenge you a little bit and have to disrupt. And you're not necessarily you got to be kind of a masochist to say like, I wanted to go do that again.
Right. That's true. So, this is probably a good time to maybe, I mean, we've already made some illustrations, but you talk Mike Leigh. So I mean, obviously we can't say this is how Mike Leigh does it, because like you said, he's developing the script with the actors, and it's much more organic. I mean, I don't even think it's not just 2 + 2 = 4. But when you watch his films, like let's take Another Year for example, which I love, like like you said, he's exploring these human relationships and these problems that are really, when I say ordinary, I don't mean boring, but I mean that we all can relate to. You take the Mary character, who Leslie Manville plays, who is lonely and alcoholic and is very attracted to her friend's son, right? And so her behavior is is sort of inappropriate some of the times, and she's not always aware of how she's coming off. She doesn't seem to know herself very well. And when I watch that, like, my wife and I love that movie, and we're like, she reminds me of such and such, and this guy reminds me of such and such. So he's exploring all of these people and these situations that are very relatable. And yet you ask yourself, how does he do it? How do you write a character that doesn't know themselves? Because as we often see in movies, the characters have an obstacle that they're capable of, jamming their way through, and they're articulate with what's their problems and how to fix it, and they kind of spill it all out to make it easy for the audience. So I mean, obviously we can't say this is how Mike Leigh does it, but do you think if there was any kind of a way to have the people watching this understand what we're getting at, do you think a director like Leigh just sort of tries to go at it as truthfully as he can, and so he's leading his instincts? I mean, I can't see how he can map something like that down.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this book that was written, I think in the late 80s, that was sort of like one of the biggest exposés to date on his methods, which he's a little cagey about. He'll sometimes, and I've actually talked to him after film screenings and kind of gotten into it with him about like how exactly this worked and that worked. It was
Right.
actually after his most recent one about Peterloo, and so it was different. But that book goes into pretty detailed explanations of, you know, he asks each of his first he casts. He doesn't have a script. He casts, right? Do you know much about how this works? Because it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Like I know he casts. He has, I guess he has a scenario or ideas. They begin to
No,
improvise, and
not
then
even. He says
Oh wow.
he
Okay.
says bring in 5 people that you know in your life or that you could play, and you bring in 5
Oh,
people that you could
interesting.
play. And then he goes, okay, let me see this guy and this guy, and they do a little improv scene together. No, that's not right. Let me see this guy and that guy. Oh, okay, and oh, okay. What if this guy and that guy, and then let's bring in this guy. So he is devising. Is, you know, devised by Mike Leigh was the famous sort of thing at the end of his first few films. He's
Right.
devising it, but the actors are bringing these real people or people they know to play, and then he's saying, well, this plus this guy equals this kind of drama that would actually be interesting. So on that level, he's instinctually this genius dramaturg. You know, he's building something this way, and then they play out the scenes and they actually write some of the things down that are said, and he builds the screenplays off of that. But it is coming from this, like, I don't know how much you're an actor, I don't know how much improv training you've done, but you know, they're trying to like, sort of turn off that kind of thinking mind and just,
right,
you know, give this truthful thing. And he's the sort of Svengali going, okay, this and this put together equals something that interests me. Like, oh,
right,
clashes of types. And so how they write it, they don't write it. I mean, they do and they don't. And
right.
I don't know to what extent he changed this word, changed that word. I don't know how detailed it gets on that level. But I know this, the dynamics that he sets in motion come from these not left brain pre-digested thinking how it's going to go kind of workshops.
Right. And so and really, even if we look at visually how he shoots his films, I mean, again, I you know, the first instinct that comes to mind is he's sort of, you know, he's not showy, right? Like he's not like a stylist. He pretty much shoots them as straight. I mean, whatever that means, straight.
Well, that's the rub right there, is like it looks straight, right? But there the more you watch his films, and also as an editor, you learn to appreciate it's not, you know, just doing normal coverage, single, you know, 2 shots, single, wide shot, back and forth.
Right.
That's not enough. You kind of have to know where at what moment to put the camera to see what or to hide what. You know, he's also not afraid to do wide shots where people interact in a sort of regular.
Yeah, I love that. It's just like 2 people, like one, like Secrets and Lies with the mother and the daughter, which is also funny, even though it doesn't seem like it is. And I'm sure
they're both facing out, right? Like that shot. Yeah. That's blocking, that's directing, that's auteur vision to me too, but it's just not announcing itself, because it puts their energies into a certain alignment that results in a kind of tension that, you know, builds that scene builds off of. So, you know, it's a misnomer to think that he doesn't think about where to put the camera or how to shoot or how to light or anything. It's just in service. And this was Tom Noonan's sort of thing, in service of the actors and the humans in the story, that let that tell the story, and not like, you know, key lighting and, you know, like we talked about Citizen Kane, the sign with the scratches and expressionistic sort of angles and things like that. Which is a little dehumanizing, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because it seems as if when people watch, like again, just technically speaking, when you watch something like a Mike Leigh film, even people into film will think, well, that's not, you know,
especially
like
people into film,
right? Especially like a quote unquote shooting a play, but like as if he just showed up, hit record. But as you said, no, there's a lot, like there's so much that thought that goes into that. Like I just reviewed on a podcast, and I did one on my own as well. It's not out yet, but Renoir's The Rules of the Game, which is brilliant. And again, it's like, okay, camera is moving a lot. It you know, it is from it is a farce in a lot of ways.
It's
Lots of
upstairs,
characters.
downstairs.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, people feel like, oh, this guy just whipped. I'm not saying people necessarily say this, but I could see how on the surface people can think that he's just whipping the camera around and shooting it. But when you think about how well blocked it has to be, how the timing of all of these various characters, these conflicts happening at the same time, these two love triangles in the chateau and everything, and you just think, my God, how did he do this and not make it a big mess? But yet it looks so effortless, and for some reason, this gets sort of written off as not being stylistic enough. It's like, unless it's like you mentioned, Citizen Kane, where the aesthetic pops, people seem to just kind of write that off. I mean, is that your?
I don't know. I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can fairly say that Rules of the Game is written off. It's often at the top of these greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, that's true.
It does
but
have
perhaps technically, I'm thinking maybe more technically. Well, maybe that wasn't the best example, but
I don't want to. I don't want to use a certain slur, but like the film bro take is like Blade Runner. And
right.
Orange and things that are cool, you know, like, and Kubrick's some of my early favorites, because it was just like, oh, this isn't just a TV show. This is somebody thinking, making images, and it's neat. So that, but I do think that neat is only like one level of using the camera. You know, then you get into like Tarkovsky and Bresson, and they don't necessarily, it's not like every frame of painting necessarily, some of them, but it's expressive camera work that is still off kilter and a little bit more challenging to follow than, say, Mike Lee. But
that's true.
To me, I mean, Rules of the Game, the more you watch that, the more you realize that what a fucking ballet of the camera.
Oh, it's brilliant.
And when to include multiple people, I'm sure, I don't know if that's one of Mike Lee's picks for his top 10, but it must be. Actually, maybe we can check. He has a Sight and Sound poll that came out, but
probably is.
You know, the ability to block drama on camera in a wide shot, right? It's like, it's so perfect. And then also, like you said, it's, you know, I've read people say it's a very modern camera style that he uses there, but it never, I don't think, calls attention to itself.
No, not at all.
The only thing I can think of is when they shoot the rabbits. That's a little bit of a ding, ding, ding. You know, that's the only time it gets a little bit into, but it's still not quite like delineated, like, oh, this is man's inhumanity to man or whatever it is. You know, it's not that reductive, but you know, so I guess your question is about like, you know, to me, this is something also that Tom Noonan taught: explicit versus implicit. And his whole thing was that the best drama is never explicit. When you're explicit, it's like a soap opera. Like, you left me. Well, I don't want to be with you anymore. I have to. You're just saying what, like you said before. And believe me, I've edited a lot of movies where I've had to try to cut around explicit dialogue because it's hard to write a scene that's not, you know, here's what's happening.
It's very direct. And they just tell the audience everything they're feeling and everything that's happening.
And that's a soap opera, and that can be involving, but like, that's not how people talk, and it's not as truthful, and it's also not, you know, it's just so sort of basic, if you will, you know, and it's so that to me extends also to everything to do with the film, you know, from its mise en scène and its lighting and its shooting and its editing. You know, that's a choice, and to me it's harder, you know, to, like I said, to make a film at all is really hard, and to be restrained enough, and maybe it's just talented enough to say, like, this is going to resonate if I don't, you know, draw all the conclusions for you, whether with the camera or the lighting or the dialogue. That's the goal. That's the highest goal. And when it's explicit, I get a little, and to me, American Beauty is explicit. You know, a lot of these movies are a little explicit, and they can be explicit about things that you resonate with, but it's still not that sophisticated, I guess you could call it.
Would you say, now when you mentioned that, you know, the more in, like, when I guess we veered into dialogue territory as well, but would you say the more implicit dialogue, like in the case, like I find when I watch Ingmar Bergman's films, you know, again, he's one of the great filmmakers of all time. He has very explicit dialogue, but it seems to just be so deep, and really is like shocking how he hits at the core of these people's problems. So on the one hand, yes, it has those things we see in movies a lot, where the characters have these problems and they're able to look inside themselves and articulate the problems, which in life is very difficult. But yet, I mean, Bergman does that, but he does it in a way where it just seems to be incredibly, yes, these people seem to have insights into themselves, but it seems to just be incredibly deep is the best way I can put it. So do you think in the case of someone like him, it works more for him because the emotions are so strong or truthful? Or
that's essentially it. Now, this is another thing that I take from my time with Noonan is if your dialogue is explicit about one thing, there can still be a feeling underneath it that's even deeper and something else. You know, when they're perfectly aligned, that's soap opera. You know, when what I'm saying is exactly what I'm feeling. So Bergman, to me, and I've only really recently really come to embrace and love Bergman, because, you know, I had to see all the films you sort of have to see in school, and it was like, oh, okay, this is, wow, this is, I mean, I saw Cries and Whispers when I was 18. I don't think any 18-year-old is going to really be able to grasp that,
no,
unless they've suffered something unspeakable.
Yeah.
But I've come to really, really love his work and realize why he has this reputation. And to me, it doesn't really violate what we were talking about here, because even though the characters do seem to be highly therapized and able to express like this, they're still, what they're feeling is so torrential. And especially all these great actors that we're talking about here, you know, you just go through all of his cast, they're still feeling something that isn't that. It's something even deeper and something that's less
beyond the dialogue.
Yeah, inarticulate, right? So to me, that's what makes that so effective, is that it's because it's still implicit about something else. So we're talking about the surface stuff, but like, to me, if I had to interpret it, not everyone, but the majority of them, especially all the ones on the island, I just kept watching all of those, like A Passion of Anna and these, you know, they're all underneath saying like, why am I alive? What is the purpose of existence? Which is like impossible to articulate. So it's in all these other ways that are not necessarily capturing that, because you can't quite capture that in dialogue or in human. So to me, he is, yes, he's sort of brainy on that level, but since what he's evoking, and this is the other, to me, key thing, what's clearly personally meaningful to him, like he's revealing something about himself, and I suppose the actors are tapping into it too, that to me, that ennobles this kind of what may otherwise be what we're calling explicit dialogue, because there is such a, and sometimes it's like alchemy, you're feeling what the director is feeling, because it's so important to him to get this out. And he's using his films not too different than Cassavetes, just in a different way to make sense of what the fuck we're doing on this planet. And it's through his particular style and lens. I'm talking about the later ones. Like the earlier ones are great too, but by the time of those latter films, he is just so like, he speaks cinema in such like a fluency that he's really going deeper into like, what the hell am I doing on this planet? Much more so than, you know, the knight playing chess with death, which actually I find that movie to actually be a sitcom, a really deep one, very funny. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't prepared for how funny The Seventh Seal is. But yeah, you know, Bergman, that's one of those guys that I was just like, he's the, and then I watched all those movies. I'm like, no, he is, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, like we were discussing earlier about the people's whose aesthetic pops, not all of his films, but his later ones do, like Persona and Cries and Whispers. So do you see that as being Kitsch in a sense, like a combination of the Kitsch and the more deeply emotional?
I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I even agree that those, like, because to me, like Passion of Anna, I mean, yeah, he does some things, like Passion of Anna has like some Brechtian things where like you see them do the slate and they're being interviewed. So he's playing with form a little bit. That to me is not kitsch because it's a little disorienting. It's a little like
Right,
off,
right.
like, oh, okay. Also, probably my favorite one is the scenes from a marriage. And I don't
Oh,
recall there
yeah.
being any real like dreamy stuff. It's very kind
No,
of,
not at all. Yeah, that's like, it feels like a documentary. It feels like a Cassavetes
yeah.
approach, if there is such a
Also
thing.
Autumn Sonata, I don't think has too
Yeah.
much of that. So no, I don't know if
I guess
any,
I'm thinking, Cries and Whispers persona, they're much more atmospheric.
yeah,
Cries
there's
and
like
Whispers
these
got the red,
dissolves in their faces and things. Yeah.
yeah, the red all
Yeah.
over the walls. Again, I'm not saying anything is wrong with it because I love all that too. But would you say that there is such, again, these are really difficult questions to answer. But are there some filmmakers who sort of have that more visually expressive stylistic style where they're also sort of getting into these deeply rich personal uh
Of course.
storytelling? I mean,
Oh,
I
absolutely.
guess that would be an example, those two that I mentioned. I don't know, is there anyone else that you can think of?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we had mentioned a few before, Tarkovsky,
Yeah,
Bresson,
yeah,
they all do things that are, to me, there's as many ways to make a film as there are filmmakers, right? Like the problem is thinking that there's a sort of fallback style. And if you're,
right,
this is the way it's done, this is, and so that can happen. When you start to do that, then you're making kitsch, then you're just making entertainment.
right,
Has to be like this. You're just plugging in these predetermined sort of effects that have
right.
worked before and so on. I don't think you could accuse Bergman of doing that.
No,
Uh,
not at all.
you know, uh, but there are other guys that I think are virtuosos of kitsch who sort of maybe innovate in a way. Like I'm thinking of Spielberg or De Palma that maybe are like, wow, I haven't quite seen it like that. But yet what they're going for is just more chills and thrills and sort of excitement and not necessarily this testing the audience, right? They're just sort of, they thought of a new way to decorate the sort of stories that they're telling. But
Is there an example from either De Palma or Spielberg that jump out to you, just like specifically, or is it just all their movies?
yeah, it's just all their movies. I mean,
Yeah,
look, I was like anybody when I saw E.T. when I was a kid. I was blown away. Raiders of the
yeah,
Lost Ark, blown away. I didn't actually see Jaws until I was a teenager, but amazing, like
yeah,
craftsmanship, scary. You're in it, you know what I mean? Although everyone has to acknowledge that the editor, his editor on Jaws was a huge part of why that movie had to be what it was. He kept pushing to include the mechanical shark, and she's like, it doesn't work. It's not working.
yeah. That would have
Now
ruined it.
everyone goes, whoa, how genius, we don't see it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's, there's some give and take there. But those guys are masters of entertainment. De Palma, I don't like, I had to see all of his films, just it's like in the film guy book.
right, right,
But like he's already a big Hitchcock sort of worshiper. So, and I was already not that huge a fan of Hitchcock. So to me, I don't get the love for him, even because he's a photocopy of another guy that was sort of an innovator in that way.
right.
I'm trying to think of, to be honest, my favorite De Palma movies are the first two he did, which were like more like
The
Godard.
comedies, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. His early stuff was, because I interviewed Rutanya Alda, who's an actor who was in Greetings and Hi Mom,
Oh yeah,
and
those are the two.
yeah, she said the same. She's like, she likes his later films, but she goes, his early stuff was so funny, and I mean, I hope I'm not quoting her incorrectly if she's watching it. But I'm not saying that she said that it was necessarily better, but just that he didn't really return to that. He sort of went into a very different direction. But Jaws, for example, so here we have a film that brilliantly is tech is so brilliant because of how it was made. I mean, yeah, it's a very entertaining story and everything. But so now, would you, for people who feel that something is high art, let's say, because it's a work of art, because you can go back and look at Jaws and make all these technical discoveries. They didn't show the shark, what the music did, the POV shot of the shark going up to the woman's biting her, and the suspense within that. For so, would you say though that that is? I mean, like, that is not. I mean, like you were saying earlier. I mean, it's still art. It's maybe just work.
It's pop art, you know,
It's
it's
pop
kitsch.
art. Yeah.
It's you know, I defy anybody to not enjoy watching Jaws unless you're like really
Yeah.
swimming or the show, you know, it's like it's just so well made for what it is. But again, what's its big question? Like, am I
Right.
or am I not going to get eaten by a shark? It's not like a, you know, I mean, maybe that's a little
Of
too
course.
productive of it, but it's not, you know, and of course it's all this stuff about the men and competing with each other. That's some of the funniest stuff to me, you know, like I have this scar and you have that scar and they're sort of dynamic, but it's not that insightful. It's just, it's provocative. And this is like the Hitchcock thing. It's like using the material of life and things that we've experienced just to push a button in the audience. And like Hitchcock's the best example. He's a super effing master at being
Right.
able to mess with you, but in the service of you know, just, oh my God, you know, and like you can't take your eyes off it. But that is, again, it's skillful propaganda and manipulation. It's not necessarily you know, expanding my consciousness, giving me new ways to see the world, in any way challenging what came before. It's I can leave and just be like, that was awesome. So
Right.
to me, that's the sort of metric that is ultimate to me.
Do you think that also has to do with the writers and the directors going for a specific genre? Like, for example, like you said with Hitchcock, he is using things from life and the themes and touching on things for life, but it's in service of this the plot driven suspense story. Do you think that sometimes the plot is what takes away from maybe getting more insight into the characters?
You know, I got to think if there's a movie I can think of offhand that is still, the plot is like, will I get murdered or not? And then it's still like a really artfully done. I think there's probably examples. I don't know. I mean, you can almost think about like a Bresson movie, like A Man Escaped. It's a jailbreak movie,
Yeah,
right? You
right.
know, like, oh, guy guys try to get out of jail, but it's the way it's done, the way it's covered, the way it's what it pays attention to, and so on, makes it this whole other thing where it's not just, I mean, that's also there, like, will he or won't he, you know, and you're you like the audience is hoping he does, and but it's to its credit, spoiler alert, that the last shot is just, and I walk out and end, you know, like as soon as it does give you any of that, the movie's over. So the whole thing is, it's about, you know, it's like three different artists could paint an apple and you would see different ways of seeing the world in their eyes if they're great artists. And so I don't think that just the plot alone of Hitchcock is the problem. I just think I want to just say it's his consciousness. It's like what he's interested in. He's, you know, he is just interested in producing an effect on the audience. Grab them, don't let them, you know, evoke those, like Carney says, those reptilian brainstem responses, fight or flight. Those are those sort of basic kind of limbic system. It's not the higher consciousness. It's not the wider view of life. And it's just, you know, pressing this sort of spinal column that you have. And again, all credit to how hard that actually is. But in the end, it's not, to me, that's what makes it this sort of entertainment and kitsch, even though he is, I mean, just, you know, you can't deny how incredibly good he is at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, I love his movies, but I mean, even he said, you know, when he shows his movies, if it's an audience in Japan or an audience in America, when he wants them to laugh, but even though they're culturally so different, he wants people to react in the same way, no matter what, which is an example, I suppose, of what you're saying of the push button, you know. So
Yeah.
I mean, just so people get a better understanding of what we're getting at, you know, looking at the shower scene in Psycho, one of the most iconic scenes, would you say that's an example of more like, okay, I want everybody to be terrified here? So with the editing, with the music, and I mean, I guess that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's studied in school for that very reason.
Yeah.
And just like the, you know, also the various close-ups, the chopping of the scene,
Yeah.
fits and the pacing of when it is and the music and everything. That's all. Yeah, it's a symphony of getting you to have this exciting moment. And it's even earlier. It's even in, you know, the scene when he's talking to her eating the sandwich and those birds are behind, you know, already you're getting like this lurky feeling, you know, every shot of his movies is doing something to,
Yeah,
you know,
and that was a metaphor there. There's a ding ding, the crows, right?
predator.
So again,
You're talking to a predator.
right.
And that's what,
right.
and that's the other thing, we haven't mentioned it yet, but this is the other thing that I think is why a lot of these movies, it's not, it doesn't explain all of it, but these movies are easier to talk about, right? They're easier to teach and to discuss in
Yeah.
film and, you know, film festivals. They're easier to say, oh, this means that and that means that, and write me an essay on what this means. And it doesn't require as much like rumination and personal sort of exploration, and they're very clean in that way. And you know, that's to me, it's a little bit of an evidence of their lesser stature in terms of some of these other works. Like write me an essay about what The Mirror by Tarkovsky is about. Like, I don't know. All I know is I was like crying when they were running across a field, and I don't know why. You know, like, I mean, I'm sure people have written essays, and I'm probably gonna look stupid. There's probably some great essay on The Mirror that I should read, but it's also, to me, it defies simple explanation. And Tarkovsky himself said, like, I'm not trying to tell you a story. Like, he was a poet, you know, he's trying to evoke this series of feelings and thoughts and ideas, but not in the psycho way. So what explains why Spielberg and Wells and not Cassavetes get so celebrated is because it's easy to talk about them and look smart, I think.
Right, because ultimately everything that they want to communicate to the audience is simple, and also it's there to pick apart.
Yeah,
You know,
if you will.
Yeah. I mean, you can go through, again, I really love Hitchcock's movies, but you can go through them, like you said, and say, this shot means this. This is what he's doing here. You know, he cuts to the POV to elicit this response so that you feel that you are in the character's shoes, et cetera, et cetera. And so even though you'll see something new every time, those things that you're seeing are the technical discoveries, you know, of a certain shot, of a certain cut. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I don't know if you'll
people
see.
write up.
Yeah, but the only thing I'll say not is I don't think you see something new every time. I think you can just you know, decode that movie and then it's there, you know, and it's sort of like, you know, it's not. It can always be entertaining and enjoyable every time, I think, you know, for all these reasons. But I don't know if it's going to reveal too many new things every time. It's also a kind of movie that you just can enjoy. Like, you know what I mean? It's not, it's just there to be enjoyed. Like, oh, you know, you'd have to be a robot to not be affected by some of the stuff that he does. Rear Window's another one that's just like, oh, you know, don't go in there. You know, these are all very effective sort of manipulations. But yeah, in the end, I think they get a little more aggrandized by their ability to be sort of intellectually deciphered in this particular way. I'm not a big fan of like Freudian analysis and all this kind of stuff of film analysis. I think it just becomes too brainy, and you know, films are not essays, you know. I think about David Lynch, right? Like I can't tell you when Lost Highway came out how much time I spent. I read the screenplay. I was puzzling. It's the puzzle film, the ultimate puzzle film. Right. And I'm pretty sure I figured it out. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but that's a kind of fun intellectual game, especially for brainy film guys. You know, it's like, I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. It's a certain, and I think David Lynch is brilliant at that, you know, but it's also, again, still in that brain level, right? Like, there's still the sort of emotional cinema, murder and sex and violence and all this other stuff. But like, what separates him and similarly Hitchcock is like, there's all these things that we can pull apart and think about and you know, and have this kind of, not easy because it's like a hard jigsaw puzzle, but like a jigsaw puzzle. And that's just
Exactly.
and that's not, you know, like I often say in my class, like there's some movies that are like going to a football game, right? There are some movies that are like going to church, you know, and then there's in the middle sort of like some movies that are about like doing Sudoku. You know what I mean? They're like they're activating something else different, but it's not exactly, it's still not church, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you're getting at. And when we talk about, you know, as you said, well, don't you may pick up on those different things, like as you said, like the puzzle film, but they're not necessarily deep. Now, what to you is an example of something where a filmmaker is getting at something deep? Would you say like DIELMAN, which was on the top of the Sight and Sound poll? That to me was certainly getting at something that, you know, really it's really hitting a chord, you know.
But also I'll just say if we're going to talk about that one, and I'm just going to say it in my, you know, terrible American accent, John DIELMAN, but if that's the that's the filmmaking style too, the actual craft, the is that's telling you something above and beyond or right with the content about her life and so on, but making you have to pay attention to things as it builds. Your focus has to shift in order to follow what's happening in a way that almost no film is asking you to do. So that whole, that's not just trying to be deep for the content or something, you know, like again, you could tell the story about the woman and her place in the world and how she has to have this domestic routine and all these things that are obviously resonant for Chantal Ackerman to make it, but also it's asking you to see in a complete different way. That to me is the hardest, that's the tippy top. That's the hardest thing to do, is to get you to actually watch the world in a whole other way. And it's rare because it's super hard, but you know, there are plenty of other examples we talked about. You know, I always go Bresson, Tarkovsky, Ozu, and you know, Ozu's a great guy who just does like these seemingly soap operas. They could be soap operas in the hands of somebody else, you know, wants to get the daughter married, you know, doesn't want to lose his job at work, these kind of things, marital strife. But in the way in which parts of that story he is presenting, in what order and with what emphasis, changes how you conceive of them and makes you have to sort of enter his mind. So God, I mean, I could go on and on.
Well, it's also, yeah, oh yeah, him he's brilliant as well. And I suppose it's also like, since we touched on Jean D, I don't know, but I guess I say DIELMAN. I don't even know if that's how you say it. The French.
I don't know. You're Canadian, right? So you got
we got the Quebecois.
Yeah,
the French. I think it's DIELMAN. But anyway, she's also putting you through the feelings by these long takes. You know, another example is Husbands, you know, Cassavetes. He's got these long sequence, like the scene in the bar, for example, with that with that poor woman that they are
terrorizing,
and you're thinking, what the hell why are these guys doing this? And so it makes it so much more emotionally challenging. But you know, we talk about, you know, films being more intellectual. Is it intellectual to then later on go to the film and ask yourself why these characters are doing what they're doing and like coming up with different possibilities? Or is that a different type of thinking?
Well, I see. I'm so totally not against trying to like understand how a film works and why it does what it does. Like that's the whole film guy thing, you know. But it's about what it is actually doing and why. Like the answer to that question, that's the difference. Not asking how does it work or what does it do, you know. And first of all, Cassavetes was very vocally anti-intellectual. Like he was not. You know, he may have had in a way, he was a savant, if you know what I'm saying. Like he just made the films the only way he could. And he didn't have this pre-planned out whole new, I'm going to be this whole new kind of thing. He just knew what he wanted it to be and what he didn't want it to be. And that was his genius. You know, he wasn't diagramming shots like, okay, we're just gonna do this long shot for 5 minutes. And then, you know, it was about capturing something different in the performances and so on. And, you know, he fought to get that movie edited to the length that it was. And yeah, that is a challenging movie.
Yeah, it is.
You know, there's a whole other conversation to be had about like attention spans and whether you're feeding into them or challenging them. Like that to me is another just consciousness expanding thing that we're getting worse at, basically.
Right.
But no, it's all about what the answer to the question is. What is he doing? Why is he doing it? Is he interested in pushing buttons, giving you these ideas, or is he trying to make you go through an experience as if watching the film is the experience, not about some other experience that I had?
Do you think there is a danger in sitting down and being like, I'm going to write a comedy or I am going to write a drama, because you may be sort of limiting yourself in terms of where you're going to go with the characters?
I don't know. It depends on you, like you may say I'm sitting down to write a comedy and what comes out is some hybrid fucked up thing.
Right.
It all depends on the person. I don't, like I was always taught, and this was something also that Noonan reinforced, like you write from what scares you, you write from what provokes a feeling in you, you write, to explore things that are intensely personal, and where it goes is going to be dictated by that. If you're doing that, you don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it's funny, maybe it's not, maybe maybe you find a way to couch it in a way that's less funny or more funny. I think it's about not being too, at least for me, if other film work may work differently, but not being too conceptual beforehand and kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's always a challenge. I imagine, because you think of some like brilliant comedy writers like Neil Simon, for example, who wrote one of my favorite movies that I know you also love, The Heartbreak Kid. And that movie is I don't know if he sits down and says this is going to be a comedy, but
well, he's Neil Simon. Did he
so
ever
then he
not
does.
write a comedy? Did he ever not write a comedy? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't mean like comedies can be deadly serious, right?
Oh, exactly.
The comedy is this guy being so immediately just not interested in his wife, and then her making every opportunity to prove to him like, yeah, that's a good idea, like pushing those buttons. And you got to give credit to Elaine May too for maybe pushing it even further and making it willing to be so offensive, really. And that's the source of humor. At least I laugh at it, but it's also like humor. It's not just yucks, right? It's this
right.
It's something deep. So that to me, that's the possibility. It doesn't have to be limited by comedy.
Exactly. Which again is something that's really interested me. It's like, how do you pick a genre like comedy or whatever, anything, and still yet not limit it to only being funny, or only being a bunch of one-liners that like Friends or something, where it's like how
well,
I don't know.
There's
again,
no law. There's no law.
Look,
there's no law against making friends. You know what I'm saying? Like there's
right.
Are you asking because you're a writer and you're trying to like explore this territory?
No, not at all. It's just it's just because when I watch that, I think, how would he know this would be funny? Because it doesn't see, like if I told someone this, it sounds horrific. I guess it's people can see the tragedy and the humor and the humor and the tragedy, I suppose. I guess they just have an insight.
I have a dark sense of humor. Okay. So I'm right there for all the darkest humor. To me, if you can laugh.
Me too.
If you can laugh at death and hate and personal foibles, like if your own that you're still afraid that you have, like that is the liberating part of comedy, and it's so valuable. It's not reductive and it's
exactly
freeing.
Yeah, exactly. I think Jerry Seinfeld once said he's like there's something funny about everything, and I guess those comedy writers just have an insight that unless you're a comedy writer, you're not going to necessarily have.
I know there was some study that you could probably Google that was about like how finding things funny is a kind of a brain disorder. Like there's a way in which the really funny people are like messed up, and which I guess makes total sense. But it's just that one little way that you're lacking something, or you have something that normal, well-behaved people don't have. That you're willing to break out of certain confinement.
Yes.
Thankfully that you can share it with others, and some will like it and some will hate it.
Yeah. And that's just something I always question and grapple with and explore. But something else just a couple of more things I wanted to ask you is, we touched on a couple of movies that I really love. Like for example, with Dustin Hoffman, Sidney Pollack, Tootsie, Network, the brilliant Patty Chayefsky, which Sidney Lumet directed. So Lumet and Pollack, they both were actors. They both were trained by the same acting teacher, actually, Sanford Meisner. And I imagine, I'm not certain, but I know from what Meisner would say with theater is he would, if he would direct or what have you, he would encourage people to, or even if he directed, was to get to the spine of the story. It's like, okay, what is the heart of the story? So Tootsie, for example, is what they wanted to get at was this character Dustin Hoffman plays. He's this, he's a guy who became a woman, and then as a result of becoming a woman, became a better man. Right. So every decision, just the
log line is funny.
Yeah, exactly. So every decision they make in terms of how they're going to edit it, how they're going to, shoot it, everything, they want the spine, let's say, to get to come through. And it's also very direct in the sense that Dustin at the end says that to Jessica Lange, like what he's feeling and everything. And so now here's a film that is very direct, very funny. But I don't think you're necessarily going to make a lot of discoveries with each viewing. But yet it gets at something that is very, to me, feels very, very real. I think most of us probably would be better men if we had to walk into the shoes of a woman. So even though that's simple, do you think simplicity, being that simple, can't really be considered, let's say, high, if we're going to give it a name, high art? I mean, you know what I mean, in the KANE vein. I don't know what you think, or is that more of just like a good movie, a very good movie?
Do you not know what I think, really?
Well, I know what you think, but the audience does.
I mean, look, I'm not here to diss Tootsie,
Right.
But it's Hollywood entertainment. It's high quality Hollywood entertainment.
Yeah.
But it's, first of all, the visuals of Dustin Hoffman dressed as a woman is just like a sight gag. So it's got going for it. It takes its premise quite seriously. It makes me ask, like, whether that movie could be made today, with all the questions of transgender.
No, it definitely couldn't.
He'd be treated differently, I think, even as he is in the movie, but or at least they would recognize him as more as a man dressed as a woman. I don't know.
Yeah,
but like
probably.
Sidney Pollack is a master craftsman. You know what I mean? Like he and Sidney Lumet is, to me, he's even more than a master craftsman. Some of his movies are some of my favorite Hollywood movies ever. Dog Day Afternoon.
Brilliant.
Network really is one of my favorite Hollywood movies. It's a satire about something that I think deserves satire, and it's insightful, right? It's still relevant to me, everything it says about the media. Like today we have shows where people are shooting everybody, like it's basically reality TV.
Yeah. It's scary what they were getting at in that.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's like more intelligent than your average entertainment, for sure. But since it's still able to be discussed in this sort of way that you're very articulately discussing it, and has these kind of digestible, shall I say, kind of insights, it's like not the top, right? If we're trying to be rankable or whatever like that, to me, there's another category of something else that it doesn't quite do. But of course it is. I mean, listen, I wish Sidney Lumet was alive today to make Hollywood movies.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites. One of my, and I of course will acknowledge that he's not, he's not someone like the other, like Mike Lee or Cassavetes that we're talking about, who's like, will put you through these uncomfortable feelings. But he his films just to me are very just very truthful, you know. They just get, even though they're simple, but they get at something that is very, not always, but
Well,
that
he
is
made a
very
lot of
real.
he made a shitload of movies.
Yeah,
So,
he's like one a year for 50 years, you
yeah.
know,
I
which
mean,
is unheard of nowadays.
I was even a big fan of one of his last movies, Before the Devil Knows That You're Dead.
Oh, loved it. Yeah,
But, you know, it's gripping. The performances are great. You know,
yeah,
just like they were Hollywood movies. I don't know how else to put it. They're not, they can't divert. I mean, to me, Dog Day Afternoon is probably the closest he got to, because
yeah.
the whole premise of it, that he's trying to support
I
his
think so. I agree with
partner,
that.
and
Yeah,
so that's a content thing that was risky. The form
right.
isn't that risky. The way the story is told is, again, the 70s were this wonderful time where you
Yeah,
could get Hollywood movies that didn't have to hit so many clean beats, and that movie is a little shaggier, if you will, then and it's to me one of the best screenplays ever written, just in its pacing and its
yeah.
structure.
It's brilliant. Yeah,
But it's, yeah, I mean, it's not that hard, it's not that difficult, you know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
again, it's, to me, that's the difference. I'm trying to think of some of his other movies that are great. Pawnbroker,
Oh, Serpico, 12 Angry
Serpico, Prince of the
Men.
City, all the cop movies, all the New
Yeah.
York
Oh,
movies, the
Prince of the City's
quintessential New York,
brilliant.
but they're movies, you know, they're not films, they're not these, you know, you could put it in front
Right.
of Japanese people and they'd be like, I get it, you know. No,
Yeah.
you can do that with
Yeah.
Tarkovsky too, but you know what I'm
Yeah. Yeah. You'll get it. You'll get it right away. And it's not like when I watch Rules of the Game, I felt it more than on the first viewing. Then I sort of got more about these people, and then watching it again, I was like, I feel like I didn't even watch this, like, because it's so
It's
thick. It's like,
unpacked.
oh my god, and just all the characters and everything that they're doing says so much that you really have to, I suppose, the films that are really about people, it's about watching the details of what these people are doing and
Yes,
how they're behaving, right? I know
yes,
Carney has said that it's like it's out in the open, right, as
yeah.
opposed to it's
Surface and depth, right?
yeah,
It's not to be interpreted. You need to understand the interactions as they actually are there in front of you.
exactly, exactly,
That to
yeah,
me comes from that sort of, that inner felt sense of why you're doing it, and not this brainy thing. That has.
right. Right, absolutely, absolutely. I'll just ask you one last thing for people watching this who are saying, who the hell cares, like about what art, what's art, and what
Did they
isn't.
get this far? If they think that, did they? I don't think so.
Maybe we've pissed them off so much that they have
They
to
were
stick
gone
around.
an hour ago.
Yeah, we'll see what the retention is like on the on the analytics later.
There you
But
go.
but in your view, what is it? Why do you think it's worth looking at? What's art, or what's maybe more Kish art?
No,
Does it really?
it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's just not. No, of course. Why? I personally have made film my life. Yes, I started with Star Wars, and it just wowed my little 3-year-old brain, like, oh my god. And yet then, through marching through all the steps of the Film Bro kind of catalog, realizing that it could be this greater thing, I actually, I think, I can't remember which one of these. I think it was the Mike Lee book of Carney's that I reviewed on Amazon when it came out. And my one-line review, which sort of answers your question, is I always knew movies could be cool, but it wasn't until I started thinking about it the way Ray Carney writes them that I realized they could save your soul. And
Yeah,
really, those are the ones I'm grasping for. Like, help me understand my place on Earth. So why is
right,
it valuable to ask that? For some people, they don't ask that. They're fine.
right,
They're
right,
either shallow people or they've found their answer, I guess,
right,
But to me, I'm interested in spirituality. I'm interested in altered states of consciousness. I'm interested in art. And film fits right into that same scheme, which is, what the hell am I doing here? How is it that I am to live? And the best films the worst ones betray that interest, right? They kind of lead you down the garden path and they just go,
Right.
it's just a joke, you know,
Right.
but the real good films are the ones that actually give you some kind of, if not answer, then at least resonate with the value of not knowing. You know, a lot of the films
Yes.
in my class teach me to be comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah, without looking for meaning and
And having
answers.
to pin it down and ambiguity and like we talked about John Dielman, like stretching your ability to pay attention and not just be like, what the hell? You know, these are all, they're soul building exercises. So it may be highfalutin to say, but to me, was it worth doing? It's worth doing if you're interested in trying to, you know, raise your vibrational level of your soul, if you buy those terms. I guess it does appeal to certain people who need their soul vibration raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ray Carney put it in a good way. It's like it's a way to develop your own consciousness as well. It's just you're learning. I mean, the filmmakers that we talk about, that I guess, again, if there is such a thing as top tier or whatever, the Lees and the Cassavetes and everybody, it's like they just bring you into these worlds, and you just see things about in people that maybe you just hadn't thought of.
Hopefully.
Or that remind you of people that you know, and now you have a better insight about them or yourself, and
Honestly,
what have you.
I must have seen Women of the Influence twice before, and the third time I got to see it projected before
Oh wow.
I realized, oh my God, I actually grew up in something like this. Like, you know, like
Yes. Yeah.
it was slowly dawning on me that like now I see why I'm so attached to this, because it is trying to grapple with some of the very same emotional dynamics or lack thereof in my own life. And you know, again, you don't have to have exactly had a biography like the filmmaker to resonate, because again, all these other filmmakers from around the world, Hong Sang-soo, you know, Ozu, all these other guys I love, they also seem to tap into something that is like both recognizable, but helping you to see it in a new way, you know. I always like to say this quote, which I don't even know where it comes from exactly, but I think it was John Cage, the experimental music orchestrator. He said, when you make something new, it's got to be like, it can't be more than like 80% new, because then you'll lose your audience completely. You know, like so it's got to be I forget exactly the number he said. And so it's like what you were saying about like resonating and identifying, there's like enough of that in there, and if you're interested in human beings, that's enough basically, no matter
Right.
what you're in or time. And then your idiosyncratic as the director artist way of seeing it, that's what I'm yearning for, you know. And
Right.
the more of those I can collect, I hopefully, you know, the more I don't know what you call it, enlightened, powerful, you know, capable of living I will be.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, I think we've talked it out for this episode. Anyway, there's so much.
I think we nailed it. All done.
Yeah. We've answered all the questions to the question marks about humans. Yeah, that is done. But I want to thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on and exploring this with me. And hopefully, you know, for people who grapple with this, we've given them some things to think about and to explore, hopefully, or even maybe some filmmakers we mentioned that you haven't seen to check out. So thanks so much for coming on. Where's the best place for people to follow you on social media? And I know you also have a class you teach.
Yeah, you can go check me out on Twitter at Langdon Boom, and on there you can see where I'm signing up now for my new film discussion group, which is you know, I send you a link of a film, and then every Tuesday at noon we talk about it for a couple hours with a group of really interesting fellow weirdos looking for these kinds of big movies. It's always the kind of movies that we're talking about mostly. And you can also look for me on Letterboxd at Langdon Boom, Matthew Film Guy's Letterboxd. You can follow along with all the stuff I watch. It's not all high art by any means. I'm not a complete masochist. I do watch all kinds of films, really all kinds. And in fact, actually right now I'm watching Sidney Lumet's TV show. I don't know if you ever saw his TV show, 100 Center Street.
I haven't. I heard about it though. I heard it was good.
It's pretty decent.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things he did. So anyway, follow me on Letterboxd, and if you're an ultimate weirdo, you can join Robert and me in the Film Lovers Agora, I think it's called,
Oh yes,
on
the
Facebook.
film lovers. It's a dangerous place.
It's a safe place, but it's not a safe place, but it's safe.
Yeah.
So come on in. Anyway, but thank you so much for having me, Robert. It was a real pleasure.
No, absolutely, and please come again. Let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.